guys always prove me wrong, and that's a good thing. All right, we are in Genesis chapter 30 this morning. Bless you. So we got through Genesis 29 last week. We saw Jacob getting married and then getting married again. Very quickly, a week apart, he got married twice. So I guess whatever happens in Padanaram stays in Padanaram. I don't know. And actually he did. So he worked, just as a kind of recap, he worked for 7 years for his soon-to-be father-in-law, Laban. And he was rewarded with a trick. He was supposed to get Rachel to be his wife. Instead, he got Leah. Didn't really notice till the next day. Oops. And then he confronted his now father-in-law that he had given him the wrong bride. And so he had to fulfill her week. Laban's instruction was. And at the end of that week, they had another wedding. He got Rachel. And then that's kind of where we left off. So... And ultimately in this, and we didn't, I guess, finish in 29, or did I at all? Let's see, how far did we get? Yeah, we were partially through 29. So Leah starts having kids. Rachel doesn't have kids, and so Rachel's the first one to say, hey, here's my handmaid, take her. She has some kids. Leah goes, well, here's my handmaid, take her. And so Jacob now has 2 wives and 2 concubines, and so he's got... let's see, it's an exponential thing, so 1 to 4 to 8, so about 8 to 32 to about 64 times the trouble. Because, it just kind of goes that way exponentially. So we get into chapter 30 is where Leah begins that process of, or Rachel rather begins that process of, here's my handmaid. Here's my handmaid. So we could read through that. Let's not, though. Let's see. Verse 25. We'll skip down to there. Verse 25. Because what we see here is Jacob continuing to work. And so we're going to see Jacob working for 7 years, getting 2 wives, 2 concubines, starting to have some children, continuing to work for Laban. As we get into verse 25, they renegotiate his salary because Laban's out of daughters, and so they have to figure out, okay, if you're going to stay on working here, what am I going to pay you? And so we'll jump in at verse 25. It came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph, and so now Jacob is at Joseph. Joseph is his 11th son. So at this point, he has 11 sons and 1 daughter. Talk about a princess. 11 sons and 1 daughter. Anybody remember her name? Nobody? That'll be your homework then. I won't even tell you. Go find his daughter's name. It's in there. Jacob's daughter. He had a daughter. 11 boys and a girl. It came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country.
Give me my wives and my children with whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service which I have done for you.
But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. And he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it.
All right, that's an interesting interpretation I've learned by divination. What Bible do you have, just out of curiosity? What translation? Really? That's worse than I thought. Okay. New King James reads experience. What does the Old King James read? Somebody have experience? It's really, and that's, I think, a better translation than divination. Divination is, the Lord showed me in a dream. Experience says, look at all this stuff around me. I can see how well I am blessed because of your service. And that really is the point. And we'll see that as we continue on, that Jacob continued to work for Laban, and Laban's flocks and Laban's herds continued to grow and to multiply and to, you figure, what was the first thing that Jacob observed about Laban when he got there? That his daughter was shepherdess, and she was terrible. So here you get a guy who actually knows livestock. You can only go up from here. And so Jacob is working, and things are doing well, and Laban wants him to stay.
So Jacob said to
All right, so Jacob's concern here is, I've been working for you, I have not provided for my house. You know, Laban, love you, dad, father-in-law. We've got 11 kids, we got 11 sons, a daughter, 4 wives. I got to feed this family. Oh, it was homework, Dinah, right? So good. Some of you are reading ahead. Good. You think? Yeah, and don't come back to attack. No, but you're a couple years ahead of us yet. So we'll get there. But yeah, Jacob and Laban, they were both as crooked as a dog's hind leg. They were both scoundrels. They were, but Jacob's concern at this point is, he has done a lot of effort, put in a lot of years, and he has nothing to show for it. He's nothing of his own other than kids. And so here's his concern, is he wants to now begin providing for his own house. And so his arrangement that he comes up with begins at 31.
And he said, what shall I give thee? And Jacob said, thou shalt not give me anything. If thou wilt do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep thy flock.
Let me pass through all your flocks today, removing from there all the spectacled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my arrangement.
Okay, now that seems random. But he's saying to Laban, look, I've increased your herd. I don't really want anything from you except like the leftovers. I want the cast-offs. What he's describing here are the animals that were less desirable. And he's like, he's basically saying, hey, give me your junk. That's exactly what he's saying. Don't get, I don't want you to go out on a limb here. Give me all your give me your seconds. Give me your stuff that you can't sell, you can't do anything with. I'll just take that. And I'll make them mine. And so he's like, I'll get rid of your junk. I'll go over here. I'll take it. We'll work that. I'll work yours. And that's all I need. Not a bad deal for Laban. You're going to take all this stuff I can't sell anyway. I mean, you think about it. If you have sheep that you can't sell for meat, and you can't shear and sell their wool because it's all different colors, and, unless you want like variegated, it's second-rate stuff. What is that sheep to? It's a liability. If you can't sell it and you can't give it away, but you still have to feed it, it's a liability. Right. But you can only eat so many at a time. And so, Jacob is here, let me take your liabilities. And Laban's like, really? This is not a bad deal for Laban. This is actually a really good deal for Laban. It would seem to be less than intelligent on Jacob's part, but this is what he requests. So what are we, verse 33?
So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, and the subject of my wages come before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the lambs, will be considered stolen, if it is with me.
So even surer. Here's how you know I'm not stealing your sheep, because if you see anything that doesn't look like a reject in my herd, then you know it's yours. That was a good theory. That theory is going to wipe out very quickly, but this is where they start. 34. Go ahead.
And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word.
He's like, yeehaw. I mean, he was like, oh, that it were according. Yes, I love it. So he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hands of his sons. Now, again, understand, though, that we have read just a couple dozen verses. We have passed through years. I mean, even with 4 wives, it takes a while to have 12 kids. And so there has been the passage of a number of years. 6 or 7 of those kids are Leah's alone. And so we've gone, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, long enough that Jacob is ready to separate this flock out, and he's going to leave them with his sons to manage while he himself manages Laban's flock. no doubt he's going to provide some supervision along the way. But he's saying, I'm going to make your flock my priority. I'm going to take your rejects and give them to my children to watch. So, Laban's still getting way the better end of the deal here, at least on paper. 37. Or 36, sorry.
Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flock.
Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almonds, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches.
And he set the rods which he had piled before the flock in the gutters and the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink.
So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted.
And Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flock toward the ring straight, and all the brown in the flock of Laban, and divided his own flock by themselves, and put them not into Laban's cattle.
And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods.
But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in. So feebler were Laban's, and stronger Jacob's.
You're up.
In this way, Jacob became very wealthy. He and his flocks, slaves, and
All right, so let me just stop for a second and say, whoa. This is an accurate recording of an absolutely idiotic idea. So when you see that in the Bible, this is not God saying, look, if you want to control what things look like when they're born, take a switch and whittle away part of the skin and stick it there so at the time of conception, if the mother's looking at white spots, it has a baby with white spots. Okay, not science, not smart. I'm not sure it's even sane. But this is what Jacob did, and this is what God recorded because it's what Jacob did. Not because God's saying, hey, try this at home. Okay, understand, the scriptures record even dumb ideas when they're not God's. Because, God's just saying, look at this guy. Look at this is funny. And he puts it in there because, this is hysterical. God's up in heaven laughing. He's like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. What was Jacob's intent? His intent was to take the strong animals, the first-rate animals, and made sure they had babies that were strong but looked bad. Because, again, he gets the bad-looking ones. He gets the ones with spots. And so if you get something that's really strong and really healthy, but it has spots, it's yours because that's what your salary is. Again, he's the heel grabber. He's the trickster. He's saying, I'm going to weed out the strength of Laban's flock, and I'm going to make them mine. And when everything that was sickly and not good was conceiving, he didn't put it there. He's like, I don't want those. They could be pure white and dead early. He's fine. And so this is Jacob's plan. Now what we find, the last verse of that, interestingly enough, Jacob became a wealthy man, and there was a transfer of wealth, because in the ancient world, in this time period, goats, sheep, this is wealth. There was a transfer of wealth. Did it have anything at all to do with what Jacob did? No. What did it have to do with? What was that little covenant that God made with Jacob? I will bless you. And it was not contingent upon Jacob being smart or righteous or godly. It was a covenant that God made with Jacob by himself, with no expectations, with no qualifications. It was just God saying, I will bless you. This is stupid, but I'm going to bless you because that's what I have covenanted to do. And so understand that Jacob being blessed had nothing to do with his whittling skills or his putting sticks in the troughs while his animals were mating as they were eating. It had nothing at all to do with that, and everything to do with the fact that God had made a promise to bless him. And so please see that and understand that as you go through. Because you could look at this and go, well, the Bible's not very scientific, is it? Well, I don't remember reading anywhere that God said, hey, do this. This is just God recording an idiot at work. It just really, that's it. The blessing was completely independent of Jacob's activities. The blessing, God promised Jacob, I will bless you. And Jacob having this transfer of wealth, all of Jacob's animals were healthy and they were strong, despite the fact that he took what would have been the leftovers. They're having healthy babies. Laban's flock, the healthy animals, are having spotted and streaked animals that are healthy but spotted and streaked. And so Jacob goes, spotted and streaked, that's my wages. Carts them over to his own flock. And so there's this No, but that's the thing. Because you take two pure white lambs and they start mating and you put a stick in front of their face that has spots on it. Is that going to do anything to the process or the product? Right, superstition. Good word, Aaron. Thank you. That's just superstition. But because God had promised to bless Jacob, the product of those two snow white lambs was one with spots and streaks. And because it had spots and streaks, that's Jacob's because that's his salary. Anything with spots and streaks becomes his. So he takes this now strong lamb that's just spotted and streaked, marches it over to his kids and says, let's deposit. Yes. Right, and that's what I'm saying. We need to understand, probably better than he did, this is not Jacob being smart. This is God being faithful. Right, and the good news to us is we can be dumb as a brick, and God is still going to bless us when He's promised to bless us, and that's good news because I've met some of you and you've met me, and dumb as a brick kind of describes us some days, doesn't it? So it's all good, and so God continues to bless him. Now you can imagine that this doesn't play out well after a while, as Laban's herd gets smaller and sicker, and Jacob's herd gets stronger and healthier. Laban begins to think, problem, and that's what we see going on into verse 31, or chapter 31, rather. Let's see, how far can I read? Not very far. So let me just summarize. So what happens is Laban sees this going on, and he goes, well, you know what? From now on, I'll keep all the spotted and streaked ones. You keep all the pure white ones. And so he keeps changing now, and that's why separating these spots and streaks now. How can you tell whose is whose? Because Laban is going to change the wages, change these conditions several times over. Trying to do whatever he can to make his flock better, and Jacob's flock, stop this transfer of wealth that he's watching happen in front of his eyes. And so he changes the salaries, he changes the terms, he changes the conditions several times over. And eventually, after a period of years, Jacob's like, this just can't end well. And so Jacob makes the decision to leave. And he turns to his wives. There's already separation between his house and Laban's house. They're a couple days removed. So he turns to his wives and says, look, your dad, he's just not so fond of me anymore. This isn't going to end well. I think it's time for us to go home. And his wives are like, well, what do we have at our father's house? Our father has squandered our inheritance. You're our husband anyway. Let's go. And so they do. With a 3-day head start, they head back to Jacob's home in the area of Palestine today, Canaan, and they leave. Eventually, Laban figures out that his cash cow just went walking, and he's already not real happy with Jacob, and so he gets his armed servants, and they go chase down Jacob, and they meet him. But as they're going, Laban has a vision from God that says, Jacob, he's mine, don't touch him. And it was enough that it convinced Laban that was the case. And so Laban eventually catches up with Jacob. He gets there, they have this confrontation. Hey, why did you steal my daughters? Why did you steal my grandkids? And Jacob's like, because if I didn't leave, you weren't going to let me. He said, or you'd have kicked me out by myself, and you'd have kept my wives and my kids, which is exactly what Laban was kind of intimating anyway. And so they have this, as Katie mentioned, they have this meal on this pile of rocks, and there is this covenant they make at Mizpah between Jacob and Laban. And we have it on those necklaces, and you could buy it at every, Christian trinket store. And it's, it's the coin that has the crack in it, and one gets half, and it's, may the Lord watch over you and me while we're away. If you read that in its context, it's may the Lord watch over us while we're away. May we never cross this border with hostility, and if you hurt my grandkids, I'm going to kill you. That's kind of the terms of the thing. So real romantic. I mean, you should definitely give that to your girlfriend or boyfriend. It just, wow. But it just shows you that Christians read necklaces but not Bibles. And so we buy these trinkets, and it's great. And so Jacob ends up heading home. How much time has passed by the time that Jacob starts heading home? Anybody remember offhand? Let's see if I can find it readily. I have a number in my head. I just want to make sure it's the right number. Mm-mm-mm. 30 years? Do you have a verse? Okay. Because that's higher than my number. That's why I ask. I think it's 20 as well. The number and the way it worked out, verse 22, is that what I heard? Verse 41, thank you. Here it is. Thus I've been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters. So 7 years on the front end, got married once. A week later, got married again. Worked 7 years for the second daughter. And then 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. And so this is Jacob's thing. I've been gone for 20 years. Remember how sickly Isaac was when Jacob left? He was about to die. Everybody knew that Isaac was on his deathbed. 20 years later, Isaac's actually still alive. He's going home to see Dad. Mom's not, though. Bummer. The way it played out, that's just, divine justice, actually. So, yeah. And we'll pick up in chapter 32 next week, because, after getting over this hullabaloo with Laban, he turns everything toward Canaan, and guess who he's going to run into along the way? This guy named Esau. this manly man with a big sword who got a big chip on his shoulder too. So we'll get to that next week. But the main thing that we see in these things, here's Jacob. He's working hard. He's grown, though. God has blessed him. And so he's returning with flocks and herds and camels and donkeys and servants out the wazoo. And God has been faithful even though Jacob has been faithless. And that's the primary lesson that we see in this. God promised Jacob, I'm going to bless you. And Jacob said, well, if you bring me back this way in peace, if you remember all those conditions, if you do this, 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 I'll recognize you as God. And God said, whatever. Unconditional, I'm going to bless you. And what we see in Jacob is that God keeps his promises, even though we really don't give him much reason to. Jacob at nowhere acknowledged God as God. Why? Because God hadn't met his conditions yet. He was still a foreigner in a foreign land. And the condition was, you bring me back to my home in peace. And so Jacob did not recognize God as God, but God recognized Jacob as the recipient of his blessing anyway.